Hello, hello, and welcome. I'm Danny Lichtenfeld, Director of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, and I'm so happy you've tuned in for tonight's event. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, maybe even finding some unexpected delights in this strange life we're living right now. Tonight's presentation is going to feature Curator Katherine Gass Stowe, giving us a tour from the museum of the exhibit Stephen Kinder, 552,830. And then we'll have a Q&A after the tour. The exhibit Katherine is about to share with us is part of a multifaceted exploration currently underway here at the museum of homelessness. Alongside Stephen Kinder's work, we have an exhibit up in our ticket gallery called Coffee and Conversation, which looks at homelessness on a very personal and direct level right here in Brattleboro. And in addition to this event tonight, we have 3 more Zoom events coming up in the weeks ahead that will consider homelessness from different angles. On a national level, in relation to large-scale factors such as wealth inequality, the housing crisis, and social justice. We'll also delve into the issues surrounding homelessness right here in Windham County, Vermont. And on September 10th, which is the next event, we'll come at the issue from an altogether different perspective, namely empathy, where Kurt White, a therapist at the Brattleboro Retreat, will discuss why we tend to avert our eyes when we walk by a person experiencing homelessness, why we try to not even see that person or this problem in general. You might ask why the Brattleboro Museum is doing this. Well, it's been our experience that art can sometimes provide a perspective on a challenging topic that opens the door to greater understanding, empathy, and problem solving. That's what we hope for with a project like this, and what we've attempted, and to a certain degree we think succeeded with projects that we've done in the past, including one that looked at recovery and addiction. We had a project that focused on guns in society. And so this is the next endeavor along those lines that we've taken on. So with that goal in mind, it's really important that you're here and participating. So thank you for tuning in tonight and taking part in this project, and hopefully taking something useful away from it. I hope you'll consider joining us for some of the other upcoming events. And I really hope you can come to the museum between now and October 12th to see these exhibits in person. The way this is going to work tonight is that I will be leaving the screen shortly, sending you up to Katie in the gallery. And when Katie finishes her tour, probably around 8 o'clock, I'll come back on, Katie will be on the screen, and we'll do a Q&A. If there are questions that occur to you during the tour, you can type them in using the Q&A button, or when we get to the actual Q&A, you can use the raise hand button and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question yourself. If you're here via Facebook Live and you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please just use the comment box, which we'll be keeping an eye on throughout the evening. Okay, I'd like to just say a few brief words about our presenter tonight. Katherine Gass Stowe, who I've been referring to as Katie, is a curator based in New Hampshire and New York. She's the founder of James Company Contemporary Art Projects. She's the curator for Bank of America in the New York metropolitan region. She has held posts at the Whitney Museum and the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, and she has curated exhibitions for the Hall Art Foundation, the Beekman Hotel, and many other institutions. We began working with Katie a couple years ago, and it's been an absolute joy We are so grateful and enriched by the exhibitions, the ideas, and the artwork that Katie has brought to our museum and our audiences. Before I turn the floor over to Katie, I would just like to extend a special thank you to Groundworks Collaborative of Brattleboro for their help and guidance with this project. And I'd also like to thank the Thomas Thompson Trust for their generous support of this project and so many other worthy causes in the Brattleboro area. Okay, with all that said, it is my pleasure now to welcome Katherine Gass Stowe. Authorized. There you go. Ready.
Thanks, Danny. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about Stephen Kinder's work tonight and show you this beautiful installation and give you a little bit more insight into his work and his practice. Briefly, I'd like to begin with a very quick kind of history of portraiture in 30 seconds. But I think it's a nice place to begin because Stephen's work is part of his project that's on view here are large-scale portraits. So portraiture historically has been a medium of the powerful, whether it's political officials or church officials or the wealthy. Portraiture has basically been a way to elevate people throughout time, as we know. But there have been lots of historical precedents for portraits of the othered or the outcast, starting with Rembrandt in the 1600s, for instance, who did many etchings and prints of homeless in his hometown. And Goya also in the 1800s did prints of people that were ill. And Toulouse-Lautrec, the famous French painter, famously did many Moulin Rouge sex workers, in addition to his beautiful ballet dancers. And then in the 1930s, during the Dust Bowl tragedy and the Great Depression, artists like Dorothea Lange with her famous migrant mother photograph, and John Biggers, many others, Thomas Hart Benton also did portraiture of people who were suffering, farmers, etc., during the Great Depression. And of course, the social realists of the 50s. And portraiture has really come back into prominence in contemporary art with many artists. The works of Amy Sherald, who did Michelle Obama's portrait, and Titus Kafour, and Carrie James Marshall, many, many others, Jordan Castile, and of course, Kehinde Wiley, who I believe we have an image of, one of his pictures from 2014. So with that, just as a little bit of background of portraiture focusing on the other, I want to introduce Stephen's work to you. So Stephen Kinder, born in 1956 in Queens, he went to Cooper Union and has had an active studio practice for three and a half decades. And it's really only in the last handful of years that he's been showing his work. And this is his very first museum show, which we were very proud to present. He lives and works in Manhattan and Brooklyn with his husband. And what you're going to see tonight is a part of an ongoing series of people that he has met. He and his husband have been very involved with the Coalition for the Homeless in the past, which is how the issue first became important to him. And it's an ongoing series. So tonight we're going to look at some of his portraiture. So with that, so as Danny said, the title of the exhibition is 552,830. That number references the number of people living in housing insecurity and on the streets in America in 2018. The number's higher. I actually researched it this year, and no doubt with the pandemic, it's going to become even higher as housing insecurity becomes a much more difficult issue. So talking a little bit about Stephen's process, Stephen has gone out into the streets primarily of Manhattan and very respectfully has approached people that he's interested in and has asked them if he could paint their portrait. And for him, it's a real economic exchange. He pays them, he takes their picture, he has them sign their signature in a book. He tells them exactly what he's going to do and how he's going to do it. And there has to be some kind, he wants the integrity and the respect of the sitter to be prominent. So it's just so, I wish you guys were all here in this gallery because it's really spectacular. So what he does is he goes out into the street, as I said, he'll meet someone like Jeffrey and take their picture, get their signature, and then he'll come back in the studio. He creates a grid and he proceeds to paint the portrait from the picture. What's really so beautiful is the way that Stephen treats every part of the portrait with equal love and attention and detail and care. He's been very, very moved by the amount of homeless on the streets in New York, and also by the simple fact that we tend to walk by these people every day. This is part of the reason that he wanted to install them up high. So not only is he kind of referencing history paintings and grand portraiture of the past, particularly religious portraiture, but it's a way to not only make them undeniable, but really give them a presence. We have to look up at them instead of averting our eyes as we walk past. So the opportunity to create a relationship with them is much different. He met many couples on the street. He found many people often had pets. And there are portraits. This body of work represents a bulk of these portraits from a particular time period, from 2017 to 2019. But there are many more as well. This is Robert. And one of my favorites, Jamie and Chocolate. But you're meant to experience the people and also the artwork in a way that you have to, you're physically related to it. You have to negotiate it. You have to walk through and among them. And very beautifully, their eyes follow you around the gallery as you're moving from canvas to canvas. So that's Carmen, actually. She's one of my favorites. Another thing that Stephen is able to achieve through the relationships and trust that he creates with his sitters, they end up showing them who they are through this, a small gesture or this. She had a great sense of humor. And he often will go back and talk to them over a period of time. This is Nelson. Nelson was one of Stephen's first portraits, in addition to another gentleman named Willie. And we have some early materials around Nelson that we can show you in just a little bit. The thing that's really striking is that, there's no specific designation that these people are living on the street or have housing insecurity. There's nothing. He's removed the cardboard signs or the sidewalk that they're sitting on or the environment that they're in. And that's very specific. It's about really elevating their humanity, which is exactly what he wants to do, but without aggrandizing them or creating some kind of strange fetishizing of them in a way. It's really a respectful portrait of how he sees them. This is Kat, and Kat was very difficult. She was intrigued with him, but she also, you could tell that there were trust issues. Stephen knows the stories of all these people, and what was very moving to me, and I think very important and impactful, is they all had incredibly different stories for why they were on the street. There's a lot of, we say the homeless, like we say migrants or immigrants, which refers to, masses of people. And that kind of takes away the individual humanity. Many of these people, there is mental illness, there are drug problems, but that's just a portion of why people find themselves in these situations. And Stephen, by paying such beautiful, exquisite attention to each person, he wants to show you their humanity. Donna is one of my favorite. I love the hands pressed together and her very gentle expression. So now I'm going to take you up to a sculpture that Stephen did in 2016. This was part of his earlier work. And it just had to be part of the exhibition because it is monumental. It fit perfectly in this particular stage, which overlooks the river beyond this historic train station, which houses the Brattleboro Museum. But this was part of the beginning of his project around homelessness. He decided to make a sculpture of the signs that people were actually carrying on the street. And what he did was, in the same way that he approached his sitters, he went up to them with materials, with new cardboard, with markers, and he said, "I'd like to buy your sign. I'm doing a project and I'm making a sculpture." And with their permission, he purchased their signs and made this sculpture in the shape of a cross. And this was first exhibited out in the Hamptons in New York, out on Long Island, about 3 years ago. And it really, I mean, the obvious shape of the cross is very dramatic, but when you stop to read the signs, which is what the cross is asking you to do, is to come up and really pay attention and read the signs and see the stories. It's extremely moving. he exhibited this on Long Island in it, along with some beautiful prints that were produced by Cone Editions, a fabulous fine art printer in Vermont. Really beautiful, highly colored prints that also featured crosses. But that was the beginning of an investigation around the shape and the symbology of a crucifix. So along with the cross, Stephen also has been developing several other works in progress and installation ideas that may make their way into other series. One was he sat in a subway for quite a while, over a series of days actually, and filmed people getting on and off the subway. And the idea was to really understand what it felt like to live on the street and sit and be kind of knee-high, length with people rushing by. And his physical experience was pretty intense. It was almost like a durational practice in a way. He said that you start to kind of become very, very numb. All you see are legs. People don't tend to stop. It's a very strange physical experience, and you start to, it's very transportive in a negative way. But he was doing a video series about that that may make its way into another larger project. He is also working on a series of hands in his new body of work that are just extraordinary too, which will be exciting to see what happens with those. So I'll show you a little bit about some of his working process and some of his sketchbooks, which are really beautiful and very important to his process. This is actually a sculpture he made very early on. It's almost 4 or 5 years ago when he started to really think about how he could translate the idea of homelessness in art in a way that made sense to him. And he has many maquettes and smaller sculptures, a few of which we have here. In the vitrine, we have 2 of his sketchbooks. Again, each page has pictures of the sitters, their names, the date he met them, and where he met them, what part of town they were in. Here we have some maquettes, ways that he was trying to figure out how to show them and frame them and install them. This is actually a beautiful portrait of a woman who is from Brattleboro. And we have another that we'll end with. Another smaller maquette for an installation idea that he had around a woman that he saw that really moved him. She was actually the subject of his print series that he did with Cone Editions. And this is a small maquette of a much larger project that he wants to do. And note the stained glass behind. There is a religious, it's not escapable that he's also interested in kind of the juxtaposition between the religious imagery and homelessness and the disparities between the two. So in his most recent portraits, he's adding color, and this is one of his most recent portraits, and I'm forgetting her name. I've I'm sorry to say, but she was, Stephen said she was a go-getter. This young woman had a plan. She had a whole strategy for how she was going to get herself off the street. It was a temporary place for her. She was filled with equal parts hope and fire. And he was just so impressed with her strength and, you know, meeting as many people as he does. He meets people in all kind of emotional states. And the story about this woman was particularly vibrant, which was really lovely, hopeful. Here are two other beautiful notebooks that he did. Each page is filled, you know, with, again, pictures, signatures. He started to collage different backgrounds, playing with ideas of, you know, imagining these people in different kinds of settings and sort of what their personalities would kind of signal to him. And again, each page is sort of a beautiful, beautiful story. So we will sort of wrap up this portion of the tour with Winnie. Winnie, Stephen came up to Brattleboro several times in preparation for the exhibition. And on one of the days, he disappeared, as he does, and he went out and found Winnie. Or Winnie found him, we're not quite sure. And he fell in love with her. There was so much light in her. She was, at the time, unhoused and unemployed. And by the time he had finished this portrait, and when we had the opening in March, on March 14th, to which Winnie came, she had found both employment and housing. So it was sort of a really beautiful kind of coming together of all these different parts. But the color, again, is something that Stephen is bringing more into the portraiture, and we'll see where that goes. Terrific. Sure.
Katie, can you hear me? Seems maybe not yet. Tim, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think Katie needs to turn her camera and microphone on. Thanks everyone for your participation and patience with the tech issues. Okay. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
It's so nice to see the galleries. And you, I feel like you must have lots of practice doing this, walking around, talking to a camera. You're really good at it, and thank you. Thank you for doing it. And thank you to all of you who are tuned in right now. I hope you have some questions for Katie, and if you do, there are two ways you can ask them. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or there should be, and you can type it in there. And there's one question in there already and a couple others that I've got from other channels. The other thing you can do is, I think you have a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, I'll get a little indicator that you want to ask a question, and then I'll be able to unmute you and you can ask your question yourself rather than typing it in. So if anyone has any questions or comments, please use those options at your disposal. And in Zoom, you have the option to either be watching in speaker view or gallery view. And right now, if you're in gallery view, you should be able to see Katie and me, and also the continuing video feed from the gallery. That's our videographer, Tim Wessel, by the way, who was filming Katie and who's going to continue filming while we talk. So if you're in gallery view, you should be able to see all of that. If you're in speaker view, you'll just see whoever's speaking at the moment. Katie, a question has come in from Greg asking, why do the portraits have such a limited palette? They're almost, but not quite, black and white.
Right, mostly monochrome. That's because Stephen really wanted to focus on the essence of the person. It's much, well, he felt it was much more powerful. I happen to agree, to capture them in a monochrome without the distraction of color. And there is something that's really powerful about it. It really draws you in, particularly around some of the details that he paints, like the zippers or the hats, the scarves. It's very, I think it's very powerful. But he is using color more in his current work, as you saw with Winnie and the portrait behind me. So.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So at one point, Katie, while you were speaking, you alluded to the, I don't know if you all are going to be able to hear this, but as Katie mentioned, we're in our museum is in Brattleboro's former train station. And there's a freight train going by right now. So I can't hear myself speaking, but I will be able to in 1 second. I don't know if you can hear any of that.
Tim's going up to try to catch the train.
Yeah, there you go. You're really getting the experience of being here in Brattleboro right now.
That's awesome.
What I was going to ask is, you alluded to like the issue of religious iconography and homelessness, and I think you said like, you know, there's a disparity there. Can you just say more about that? I feel like it may not be entirely clear what you were referring to there.
Well, and I apologize for not in advance if I'm not clear about this, because I think it's also meant to be a little bit tricky. But I feel like Stephen and I have had many studio conversations about religious propaganda and art in religion, and using it for, you know, particularly the Catholic Church for many years, using it for power and control. And so using some of the symbols and the, you know, stained glass or the shape of a crucifix to kind of redirect where the power is focused. And that tension between the two and the juxtaposition of that, I think he's been interested in. It's not a constant theme, but you know, when you go into church, you're meant to feel awed. You're meant to have this sense of kind of spiritual awakening. And I think he wants the same feeling when you're looking at the portrait, that feeling of elevation, although in this case, he wants you really to focus on the humanity of these people, the embodiment of these people. It is kind of about their bodies, and I think that's a very, you know, it's an important topic now in what's happening in Black Lives Matter, and with the Me Too movement and what happens, how we treat our human bodies, you know, and each other's human bodies. So that's all kind of
Wrapped up.
baked in there.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. There's a comment here from Steve who says, thank you for pointing out the powerful nature of looking up at the portraits and therefore the individuals. It's so different than looking down. Also, the contents of the cross are very moving. These are voices of the voices of the individuals. Yeah, I think that's that comment from Steve, Katie, is a testament to a success in the work itself, but also in the way that you as the curator decided to present the work. Right? It seems like it's having the desired effect.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Thank you, Steve. I would like to mention one of the early iterations for the installation even had an idea to create kind of a ramp and have large-scale portraits along both sides of the ramp, but where their eyes were, there was going to be kind of an empty slot, and people were meant to walk behind these portraits and look through. So there would be, you know, the emphasis was on seeing, because so much of the plight of the housing insecure is that we don't, you know, they're the unseen. They're people that are being walked by, walked over. And he was really concerned with this notion of seeing and being seen and putting us in that kind of, I was going to say phenomenological mode, but that's a little over the top. It was more about physically experiencing, being seen, and then seeing out. And that kind of got, I wouldn't say scrapped, but it got shelved for this more simple installation, which I think is really powerful.
So, and speaking of that and the installation, there's a question from, or comment/question from Rachel on Facebook, who says, I noticed the portraits are hung tightly together, like walking around in a clothesline. This had to be deliberate. Can you talk a little bit, Katie, about how you and Stephen decided to hang the portraits in proximity to one another and the tight spaces and all of that?
Sure. That's so beautiful, Rachel, the idea of a clothesline. I love that. I'm kind of mad I didn't think of that myself in the beginning. That's really great. That's absolutely right. The idea, well, again, back to this idea of embodied, both elevating sitters and really kind of having a physical experience with them. We wanted to create a maze situation where people had to negotiate them and walk around in and between. At one point, they were just going to be back to back. At one point, they were going to be lined up against the wall. But we all felt, and it was definitely a group collaboration, that it was more powerful to have space in between them, have some of them angling towards, you know, one another, being able to see through two of them towards another canvas. It was just a more interesting way to present it. And it's really, I do urge anybody coming up to beautiful Vermont or people that live within reach, come and experience it physically for yourself, because that's a big part of the experience. I mean, they're incredibly beautifully executed portraits, but physically walking through the gallery is a whole different, it's a whole different thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, Katie. And my mistake, that question was from Rebecca, not Rachel. So thank you, Rebecca, for that. And I'm sort of monitoring several things at once. So if you just said this, Katie, I apologize to you and to everyone else. But an aspect of the way the portraits are hung that I think is really, really effective is that as you move around, you find yourself in these spaces where you're like in very close quarters with this person who's larger than life size, and you really have no choice but to confront this person in a very visceral way. And it's a really powerful experience and different than many museum experiences where you can stand far back from the image and the image is not life size but much smaller than life size. So you may have just addressed all of that. If
No,
you
we
did,
didn't.
I'm sorry.
That's a fabulous comment, and it makes me think of something that's so unique about this beautiful little jewel of a museum is that they're 18-foot ceilings. So there's a whole different kind of airspace and quality. It would feel completely different in another. I think they'd still be very powerful, lifted in any space, but in this particular space where it is cathedral-like, which is why also the cross is so powerful up in the up on the stage. It's really pretty spectacular.
Here's a wonderful comment from Greg, who notes that you talked about the elimination of background and context so that we focus on the person. In a number of cases, this is Greg speaking, he says, in a number of cases, I couldn't see much difference between the portrayed men and what I would have looked like in the winter. By getting rid of the context, we can see that similarity much more easily than when we pass people on the street, in the subway, etc.
That's beautiful. That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly the a key takeaway, I think, from the experience is that it's also what COVID teaches us is we all are the same. We all affect each other. We all have basic needs. We all, that humanity and that connection is really key. It's really beautiful. And I'm so delighted that you got that from a Zoom presentation. That's fabulous. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. So Katie, I imagine that you as the curator must be feeling like a lot of what you hoped people would take away from this exhibit, you've been getting the sense that it's in fact what people are taking away. Is that right? Or are there other things that you would like people to know that you really, were hoping would be takeaways from the exhibit that we haven't really touched on?
Well, it's a much larger conversation. And I think, Steve, in terms of homelessness and being housing insecure, and I think Stephen's work is touching on a really important national conversation that needs to happen and is happening. I feel like I do feel like there's a lot more to experience, but the experience is very intimate and personal. So on a general level, I would say, and certainly for Stephen, this is his first solo museum exhibition, which is really important and wonderful. But for people to try to experience it themselves, Stephen wants, which is the most important thing, have a relationship, an intimate relationship with these people through his work in a way that he doesn't. There's no proselytizing. There's no, you need to come away with empathy or compassion. There's no real agenda there. Obviously, that's a hoped for byproduct But I think his greatest hope is if you can see them and realize that they're individuals with their own stories, that's probably the most important takeaway. It really sounds like that happening with the people that are coming in and some of the people who come into town. So it's a great thing.
Well, I've certainly had that impression too, being around the museum as the exhibit's been up, and thankfully, you know, as you know, Katie, and many of you may also know, the exhibit opened in mid-March and closed the next day, and we were just so crestfallen about that. But then, thankfully, thanks to the real you know, good work that's being done in Vermont still, you know, to keep the virus to get it under control, keep it under control, people being responsible and safe and respectful of one another, we were able to reopen the museum in mid-June. And so a lot of people have actually, more people than we were expecting, have been coming to the museum in person and wearing their masks and staying socially distant, but getting a chance to see the exhibit. And so we've been getting feedback, and it all reinforces, I think, what Stephen has hoped for in creating the work, or my understanding of that anyway, and what you have hoped people would take away from the exhibit. So I thank you so much for that. And I think Stephen, the artist, may even be in our virtual audience here tonight. So if he is, Stephen, we all profoundly thank you for your work and sharing it with us. And once again, I would just like to thank all of you for being here tonight and participating. The exhibit and 7 other exhibits that we have right now will be up through October 12th. So maybe we'll have a chance. I hope you'll, you know, have a chance to come see the exhibits in person. And you can go to our website or follow us on social media to learn about the other events we have coming up in the next few weeks that relate to this project. I think they're going to be really interesting, and really grateful to our partners who I mentioned earlier who helped us put these events together so that we could use Stephen's artwork as a platform for some learning. And
you've done that so beautifully, Danny. That's a really wonderful part of how you program, and I wanted to thank you for that. And actually, the museum link to Stephen's show is so thorough. There's a beautiful catalog that the museum produced. The essay is online. There's just all the resources are online. The other events, and it's just really well done. So
thanks for saying that, Katie. You know, we're plugging away here, you know, telling ourselves that we can do things like this and they can actually make a difference in people's lives. So I believe that, and I hope that's the case. So thank you once again. And let me say thank you not only to you, Katie, but also to our fantastic videographer, Tim Wessel, who has carved out time in his busy schedule as chair of the Brattleboro Select Board to do this for us tonight. So thank you very much, Tim. Stay safe, everyone. Take care of each other. Wear your masks. Vote. Do all the things we need to do to make the world a better place. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon. Good night.